I know. And then I told Karen, like, listen, Karen, you're being too much like a Karen. And then it was just, oh, okay, sorry. We're just having a really important conversation. But not as important as the stuff we're going to talk about today. I'm going to teach you about how history repeats itself and teaches us nothing. So we're going back in time all the way to the 1890s, all the way through today, 2020, if this year even counts, to talk about how every macro, proteins, fats, and carbs were at one point or another each considered the bad guy. The year is 1890, and the culprit, protein. And yes, I did say protein, and that means back then your gains were in jeopardy. The idea that protein was not so good for you came from a guy named James Kellogg who promoted vegetarianism, and he claimed that protein created bacteria in our colon, released toxins, caused constipation, all this stuff. And because this guy back then was so well known and highly thought of, famous people like Amelia Earhart and a lot of other celebrities jumped on board, so did everyone else, and people ended up doing some pretty stupid stuff. They ate 14 pounds of grapes a day, yogurt enemas, and they would chew every bite 100 times, just because this guy said so. The whole thing behind this was that Kellogg had a hidden agenda. He wanted to dethrone protein as the best breakfast. He didn't have any skin in the protein game, and it wasn't making him any money. So he wanted to then, in turn, make carbs the best breakfast. So what did he do? He came up with cornflakes, aka Kellogg's cornflakes, and made a crap ton of money. So there it was, protein's bad, carbs are good, and he got rich. But then all of this was actually disproven by actual science. Next up, we have the 1950s to 1970s, and the new bad guy in town, fats. So there's three main types of fats, right? There's unsaturated, saturated, and trans fat. Which unsaturated, they can be actually broken down into subcategories, but to keep it simple, that's what we're going to go with. Saturated fat increases our bad cholesterol, and our bodies actually make enough of it on its own, so we don't really need to get it from the food that we eat. I'm not saying that you should never eat these things, like they would come from like red meat, but that's something that you would just limit versus something like leaner meat or white meat that you would eat more often. But the way this was presented back then had like women freaking out saying, "There's saturated fat in meat, it's so bad, don't eat meat!" Uh-oh, the meat industry will not like that. So the meat industry then freaked out because everyone was like, don't eat meat, so they had to come up with a way to take the heat off of meat and put it onto something else. So instead of saying eat less meat and possibly hurt their bottom line, they just said choose meat that would reduce your saturated fat intake. So this took some of the focus and attention off of meat, something that you can see and understand, and put it on saturated fats, like a nutrient that you can't see. But just as a backup plan or another way to distract people from saturated fats, they came up with use trans fat as a healthy alternative. Now we're in about the 1990s, which was the best decade. People were now so afraid of saturated fats, a company would then substitute trans fats in their products so that people would still buy it, but it turns out trans fat is the worst type of fat that you can eat. Remember that whole like butter versus margarine craze? Yeah, butter was messed around with and the polyunsaturated fats had to be altered in order for it to be spreadable, which turns it to trans fat, which your body can't use at all. Trans fats are used in a lot of places. Baked goods, fried foods, all that kind of fake stuff. I did an extra video about trans fats a couple weeks ago, so go check that out because it's really misleading about how they put them on labels. Trans fats were marketed as a healthy alternative to saturated fats, which then they later figured out was actually worse when America just kept getting fatter. So at this point, America's like, oh man, all fats are bad, make it fat-free! And this mandate to now make everything reduced fat or low fat was really just another marketing technique for them to sell us new stuff and stuff that was worse for us. But because everybody was so afraid of fat, they're thinking, oh, low fat, no fat? Okay, this is what I have to buy because this is what I'm being told. Meanwhile, everyone forgets about unsaturated fat and the good fats that we actually need to survive, and they just lumped everything into one this is all bad category instead of taking it piece by piece and just maybe limiting the bad stuff and keeping the good stuff. They just made it all seem bad, and that was it. And the food industry loves it because they just keep continuously getting to remanufacture the same types of foods, but just in different ways, whatever the newest trend is, and then resell it to you in a new way that's going to make you think that it's better for you. But the problem with this whole no fat thing is fat makes food taste good. So now what? Yep, you guessed it. Now is when they started pumping everything with sugar and preservatives and fake stuff as a substitute for the fat, which then just made us fatter. And now people are thinking like, what the heck, we keep changing stuff and we just keep getting sicker and fatter and dying and I don't know why that voice came to mind, but that's just what happened. This led to a new style of frankenfood to where companies can put so much preservatives and fake stuff in food to make it last longer and give it a longer shelf life. So they would say it stays longer, fresher longer, but really what they mean is it would stay on the shelf longer. So if you didn't buy that bag of whatever for a couple days or weeks or months, that company doesn't lose money because you didn't buy it by a certain date because it's pumped with so much filler and so much preservatives that it'll stay there for a very long time and will still be there. A great example of food never decomposing is fast food. So that picture has a watermelon that was 80 days old, looked pretty nasty after that time, and then a Happy Meal that was 180 days old that still looked like you just bought it. This was actually from an article from the USA Today a while back. And it started as a bet. I think the guy was like, you eat this so often, I bet you can't not eat it for a week or something. And the guy was like, sure, I'll take the bet, bought it, and like had it sit at his house as a way to prove like he had willpower or whatever. And it turns out like weeks later, this thing still hadn't changed. And then they just kind of went and see how long they could have it last without actually decomposing like normal food actually should. McDonald's actually got wind of this and tried to make like every excuse in the book for like why it wasn't rotting like normal food would. And they said like, oh, the conditions weren't perfect, or there wasn't enough moisture or too much moisture, or that we use real ingredients so it should. Maybe that one's just bad. Yeah, real ingredients, I'm sure. Anything with that much fat and salt in it that's like a doorstop is just killing your insides. It's not the first time it happened. There was actually a lady in 1996 who bought a burger and didn't eat it, and she actually kept it for 12 years to see if it would ever decompose, and it didn't. She ended up using it as like a teaching tool to teach others about how bad this stuff actually is for you. So let's recap the past couple decades. Saturated fat was bad, which led to trans fat as a healthy alternative, which ended up being worse when everyone was still gaining weight and having even higher risks of heart disease. So then it was, all fat is bad, let's just replace it with a crap ton of sugar and preservatives to make it taste good and last longer. But then it was brought to their attention that, without fat, people die. It was later admitted that this whole low-fat and fat-free campaign was based off of little to no research, and that pumping everything with sugar and preservatives and fake stuff was not a good idea after all. This was figured out through the rise of type 2 diabetes, so in trying to make the public healthier, they actually made it much, much worse. And then welcome to today, where you have things like keto, which is basically like the failed program of Atkins reborn, who swears that carbs are bad and carbs are the enemy. You should never eat carbs. Don't ever eat carbs. Pee on a stick. But again, here we are with these fad diets, only telling you part of the story, or only concentrating on one piece of it versus the big picture, and when really keto was never made to be a sustainable type of diet. It was created to help those with epilepsy. There are 3 macronutrients for a reason. You need all 3 of them. You need fats, you need proteins, you need carbs. They all do something different in your body, and you need them all to survive. Just focus on the right types of each one of these macronutrients, and you are fine. We have spent way too much time focusing on one single nutrient versus think about food as a whole. It's not that one single nutrient is good or bad. It's the fact that we're not even eating food anymore. We're eating food-like products. Raise your hand if you feel hungry or sick after eating like highly processed foods or junk food or fried food. That's your body telling you that it's still hungry for the nutrients that you didn't get the first time, and it's telling you to try again. So hopefully this helped you kind of see the trends over the past 100 years or so, and help you realize that, these trends happen because of what's being promoted out there and based on what people want to sell or how they want to sell things. So keep that in mind when you maybe are jumping on the next train of whatever the new fad thing is, or buying something just because the label says it. Because you do need all macronutrients and all micronutrients, and you need the right amounts, and you need the right kinds of each. So, yeah. And I'm sure at some point protein will be bad again for some reason, and then everyone will freak out because they'll lose all their gains. Why did Kellen gotta hate on protein, though? I bet he skipped leg day. All the way up through today, Junior! And he promoted I can't say anything. I can't say words. Up 1950s to 1970s? I don't know what that was. Excuse me, I just burped.